Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 546. I decided to start off with knight f3, going for a Reti opening, and my opponent plays f5, which is kind of a rare response, but not all that bad. It's Black is going to go for a Dutch defense kind of setup. In this case, he goes for the Stonewall Dutch, but f5 can allow other formations, the Leningrad Dutch, or other setups as well. The main moves here, I guess, are knight f6 and d5, but interesting way to play. I go g3, continuing with this Reti setup, and he goes e6. You know, the opening book put a question mark there, but I think it's a perfectly reasonable way to play, and if you let the chess engine think about the position for a while, it finds e6 and knight f6 are pretty comparable. So I think there's nothing wrong with the way that Black is playing here. I go bishop g2, he goes knight f6, and then I go c4. So it's continuing in Reti style. I might have been able to maybe play a little more aggressively with d4, but that would put us into typical Dutch defense type of positions, and I was kind of wanting to stay in this Reti territory. This Dutch setup, you can also play this against the English opening. It's kind of an interesting way of avoiding immediate conflict and going for a long game. So the battle for the center, notice that both sides have avoided placing any pieces, any pawns in the center. So the battle for the center will continue, but from the sides. Anyway, Black continues with bishop e7, and I castled. He castled. Yeah, again, I could have played d4 there. And now I play the rare move e3. So e3 is not preparing d4. If I wanted to play d4, I could always just play that immediately. There's no pressure on the center to stop that. The idea I had with d3 was to stop this f5 to f4 push, which is a common theme in the Dutch defense, pushing that pawn forward to create some weaknesses around White's king or in the center. So with two pawns clamping down on that square, it's often a good way to kind of shut down this counterplay. Looks like, yeah, it's on the list of moves. I mean, it still keeps an edge for White, so it's not like a horrible move. We're just out of the opening book. If we look at main ways to play, yeah, d3 or continuing in Reti style with the fianchetto on the other side, b3, knight c3, would be the most common ways to play. Okay, but I played e3, and we're just out of the opening book here. And it's kind of an interesting position, I think. He goes c6, setting up a real light squared pawn chain here. He's going to play d5 a little bit later and get a Stonewall Dutch. So I go ahead and play d4 at this point, and I'm feeling pretty confident at this point about my ability to hold on to the big center here. And I decide to play b3. The idea is to be able to retake this pawn with another pawn, so I keep a majority or a lot of pawns in the center. Can't say it's a majority because the pawns are all equal. Equal number of pawns. Okay, so he goes bishop to d6 here. Kind of interesting, repositioning that bishop. Maybe is that really the best move here? I mean, normally you would expect to see some other developing move with these pieces, but the engine is indicating b6, knight e4. Yeah, well, bishop d6 does prepare an early push of the e-pawn, so maybe he's thinking about that. It also is looking at this square, looking at the f4 square, so he may be thinking of renewing his attack on the f4 square, getting that kingside attack rolling. So it's kind of interesting, but he did waste a move because the bishop went first to e7 and then to d6. So you have to question that in terms of Black's play here. I go knight c3, just keeping developing. He goes queen e7, getting behind the e-pawn. I decide to push on with c5 at this point, kick the bishop back. And at this point, I kind of, I'd been undecided up to this point about what my strategy is. Am I playing against the center or am I playing on the queen side? But here I'm deciding to play on the queen side, and my intention is to push these pawns forward and create weaknesses and use this as a long-distance piece to help attack along this diagonal. Although, let's see, this piece is not really well positioned because I'm going on a dark square diagonal here. This piece maybe needs to come back to the f1 square and support the pawn push to b5. But anyway, that's for the future. At the moment, I'm just thinking about pushing these pawns forward and creating weaknesses over here. The point, though, I was trying to make is this bishop on g2 doesn't necessarily fit with the plan I've chosen because it's looking at these pawns here, which are pretty solid. Okay, my opponent goes bishop to c7. I kicked it, he dropped it back. I go on with b4. Plays knight bd7, getting another piece into the game. I go a4, so I'm just continuing with this strategy I have. And now he pushes e5. So we can see that this putting the bishop on this diagonal and putting the queen here, also the knight on d7, was intended to support this d5 push. Bit of an unusual plan. And I took that pawn right away. I don't like positions where I get really cramped on the king side, so I'm preventing him from playing e5 by just e4 rather, by just taking that pawn. But the chess engine says I should not be so afraid. I should push on with a5 or b5, continue with my original plan. So a5 does not make much sense here because these pawns, to me, it does not make sense to me because these pawns seems like he can just blockade those pawns. So I would push on with b5. And how about if he just plays e4 here, kicks my knight back, so the knight drops back to d2. I would probably put it there rather than e1. g5. Yeah, this is the kind of thing I think this can be pretty dangerous. The engine so far is not at all afraid, but we get into these kind of typical, this kind of position would be typical for a King's Indian defense, where black has just pushed the pawns on the king side, white's attacking on the queen side. This can be good for white because you can, if you can hold off this attack, then you can win material on the queen side and even the game at the end. But it is a risky way to play because black always has a possibility of breaking through. I have set up this fianchetto, which sometimes will slow down the kingside attack. So maybe that's why I'm okay in this position. But this is not the kind of position I was wanting to play. So I take the pawn right away. I just wanted to point that out. The chess engine immediately gives up on the advantage that white has. And for the next few moves, we're in the range of about even. Sometimes the chess engine thinks black is better, but not a whole lot better. You know, it's still in the range of about even. So he takes, and I just continue exchanging here and bring his bishop forward. I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to kind of resolve that tension. I play bishop b2. And then right here, there's a tactic in this position which I didn't notice, and he didn't notice either. He just played the move knight to e4. And so this is the first tactic that I overlooked. I'm not putting that move on the board because the chess engine would give away the answer then. But if you can imagine that black has played knight to e4, what tactic does white have in that position? Okay, it's a pretty cute tactic, so it's worth pausing the video and thinking about it, seeing if you can find it. But I'm going to give the answer away now. My opponent played knight to e4, and the tactic I had here was knight takes d5. Okay, what's up with that? Well, first of all, it's a forcing move. The knight is hitting the queen, so you have to do something about that. And so if you take the knight, kind of the most natural way to respond, then queen takes d5, check, is another forcing move. And it also is a double attack because the queen and the bishop are attacking the bishop, and it's only defended by the queen. So I'm attacking a piece, and I'm attacking the king, and I'm just going to win material. So after knight takes d5, you actually can't take the knight. It's better just to move the queen, in which case I've won a pawn. So that's kind of cute. It's not so easy to see. But basically the idea is to sack the knight for 2 pawns, but come in here with the queen check and get a piece back. And if you can see it, if you can see it, that's a good kind of tactic to spot because it's one your opponents will often overlook. You know, one reason this didn't immediately jump out at me is that you don't see the Dutch defense so often, and so this kind of tactic, playing against the d5 square, is pretty rare, and really it only works because of the fact that black has moved his f-pawn forward. So it's an example of how, if you've gained experience with a particular kind of position, such as if you've played a lot of games against the Dutch, you're going to be more in tune to the kinds of tactics that can crop up. So I think that's why it's worthwhile studying this position for a while, especially if you have some opponents who play the Dutch defense against you. And also, if you're someone who likes to play the Dutch defense, this is a tactic and the kind of tactic that you need to be aware of. Look for those little sacrifices on d5 that expose your king to a check and a double attack. Okay, anyway, he played knight e4, and I played queen c2. I totally did not notice that tactic. And now we're back in this range of about even to slightly better for black. He continues with queen to f6, logically lining up on the f-file. So he is planning once again to push this pawn forward as well. He's pushed the e-pawn forward. I guess now he's going to bring the g-pawn in to help support the f-pawn, as that's his kind of plan in this position. Go rook a to c1. Need to get some things off of the need to get some pieces off of this diagonal, so that and also needed to support the knight. That's right, the knight was coming under pressure here. He goes bishop to d7. I go knight to d1, and this allows me to kind of neutralize the pressure along this long diagonal. And let's see, by this point it's gone back to even. I was just wondering if there was some moment here where he had a really good move. a5. Okay, that's kind of counterintuitive. He's logically operating over here on the king side, where that's his plan. But it looks like a counter-strike over on the queen side, a5, to break up my pawn formation here. Might be in order. It's an interesting point. Okay, but he goes queen f6. I defend the knight. He brings his bishop to d7. I go knight to d1 to neutralize the long diagonal. We get this trade. Bishop takes. Knight takes. And then he goes rook a to e8. All staying in the range of about even. I go rook c to d1 here. And now he plays another move which allows a different kind of tactic. So here's your second tactical quiz, and this is the second opportunity I missed in the game. His next move is queen to c3. So he brings his queen in here. I guess he's ready to go for a queen trade and play this endgame. I don't know if this endgame is particularly good. The chess engine wants to push on with f4 right here. He's kind of lined up his pieces for the f4 push. He's lost his dark squared bishop, but it looks like f4 is an interesting pawn sack here to open up lines. I mean, on f4 I would just take it, and then his knight hops into c3, and maybe he's going to get some activity with his pieces. Another way to play it is with h5, bringing more material in this way. I was thinking g5 is the logical way to continue, g5 and then f4. So all those kind of make sense. This giving up the queen, I think, is probably not a good idea, allowing the queen trade in this position. Yeah, although I don't know if it's bad either. If you look at the pawn structure, it's pretty solid for black. He hasn't got any particular weaknesses. This advanced f-pawn can be defended by the g-pawn, so it's probably not a problem going to the endgame either. But there's a tactical problem with the move queen c3, so that's the point I wanted to get back to. So if you want to think about this, pause the video and see if you can figure out what white can play in response to queen c3. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. This is a very simple tactic in a way. I've seen this many times in tactics, puzzles, and quizzes and things like that. It's just a classic remove the defender. You play bishop takes knight. The knight is the only piece defending the queen here. And bishop takes knight not only removes the defender of his queen, it also defends your queen. The bishop here defends the queen. So it's kind of rare in practice, but I've seen it in a lot of puzzles. I'm kind of sad that I didn't spot it during the game. But I have not seen this in many real games. It's mostly tends to show up in tactical puzzles, but a classic kind of tactic. So yeah, bishop takes e4 just wins a whole piece. He either has to retreat the queen, or if he goes ahead with the trade. Well, if he retreats the queen, then I retreat the bishop, I've grabbed a piece, and if he trades, then the bishop comes here and takes back. And once again, I'm a whole piece up. So basically, this knight is just loose here, and I can take it. Okay, so I didn't spot that. I go for the endgame, which is about even. Okay, we get into this endgame, and you can see it's pretty much even. But, well, the game continues from here, and it's an interesting endgame. Maybe it's not quite. I guess since I did this piece on the... I just was talking about the middle game and the endgame in a recent video. Maybe this is still late middle game, because the amount of force on the board is 2 rooks plus 2 minor pieces, so that's a total of 16 points. So we're in that fuzzy region between the end of the middle game and the beginning of the end game. Let's see, he's hitting my rook, so I brought the rook over here. I want to put it on a square where it's not going to be harassed again by his knight, and also maybe I'm going to open up some lines on the queen side. He goes knight e4, he goes knight d3, getting my pieces active. He goes g6. So like I said, he's got a solid pawn structure. There's no particular weaknesses. But he doesn't have any big advantage going into this endgame either. I go rook a2. I'm thinking maybe I can double my rooks at some point. He goes rook e7, rook b2. Yeah, that's really where I want to be. I took this kind of roundabout route to get here, but it's much better placed on the b file. Couldn't go there directly because his knight on c3 was guarding those squares. He goes rook f8. Lining up on the e file, I push ahead with b5. So I'm just continuing. A lot of times in the endgame, notice the knight is supporting the c pawn. A lot of times in the endgame, these advanced pawns will really win the game for you. Sometimes you can even sacrifice a piece to get an advanced pawn like that. He's ignoring things for a while. He plays king g7, and there's no advantage to me to take. I was sort of hoping he would take. And let's see, he plays g5, kicking my knight. He could have played, what, knight takes c5 here? I gave up a pawn. That's interesting, yeah. So it's interesting that it's not completely losing. Let's take a look at this. If he takes the pawn, yeah, remember, I think I spotted this during the game. I could take here. He takes back. Yeah, he's a pawn up, but maybe the idea is that this pawn is a bit weak here. Rook to c1, kicks the knight, and knight takes a4. Rook to a2, hits the knight again. Knight to b6. Then I can get some pawns back. Rook takes a7. g5. Knight back to d3. I think, yeah, with the bishop here looking at these pawns, and my rooks cancel that. With the bishop here looking at these pawns on the light squares, it makes it difficult for him to move these forward. So I've effectively blockaded them, and I have active pieces. So that's enough compensation for the pawn. So I don't lose the game with this move knight f4, but certainly it was an unnecessary loss of a pawn. Anyway, fortunately for me, he played g5. And let's see, I drop into e2. He can once again grab the pawn. But he went king f6. And I go knight to d4. Getting this knight, that's kind of what I was trying to do, is get this knight around to a good active square in the endgame. I just should have prepared all that by defending the c pawn. And once again, well, if he takes, it looks like I have pretty good compensation for the pawn in this case. That's kind of interesting. Oh, because I'm looking at c6. So by this point, I guess my pawn on c5 is indirectly defended by my threats against c6. So I'm no longer losing a pawn here. He went knight to c3, getting his knight back here, hitting my pawns over here. But this time I spotted the tactic. So b takes c6, hitting the bishop. He takes back, and I played knight takes c6. It's even better to play rook to c1, hitting his knight and chasing it around. Let's follow this line from the chess engine. Rook to c1. Now, what if he just grabs the pawn? Yeah, knight takes a4. Maybe the knight gets trapped over here. Rook to a2. Yeah, the knight looks like it has no good squares to go to. And it can't be defended because you can take the pawn en passant. So knight takes a4 is no good. And then what else? Knight back to e4. And a5, pushing this forward. Okay, that's not the tactic I was thinking of. Let's just go on with the game. He played, let's see, I played knight takes c6. instead of rook to c1. He took the pawn. I go on with a5, so keeping some edge here. He goes knight to b5, giving up the edge. Rook to c2 once again is a good move, harassing his advanced rook. Knight to b5. Okay, and here's where I spotted the tactic. That's what I was thinking of. It's this point here where, and at least I saw this one, the pressure on the knight plus the bishop looking at the pawn. Classic case of removing a pawn that's defending a piece. So he can take, and I grab the knight, or he could move the knight. The chess engine thinks he might as well take. He gets a bishop for a knight at least. And now I'm a piece up, and I have a good chance of winning this endgame because not only am I a pawn up, but this is a passed pawn. And black doesn't have any passed pawns. So I think this is an endgame I probably ought to win with good play. So let's go forward a few moves and we'll see where I go wrong. King e5. He plays this part well. Rook to c1, king e4. He gets his king active, which is what you need to do in the endgame. We're clearly in the endgame down. We're down to just 2 rooks. I push on with c6, keeping an advantage all the way. He blockades the pawn. I go rook to b7. I'm thinking, well, maybe I can just trade off one of those rooks and I'll be able to win with that passed pawn. But he just defends with rook e to c8. So I do get one of these pawns, but now his king is getting closer to where it can help his rook round up my pawn. So I start getting my king in. He goes king to f3. That's a mistake, actually. That helps me. He's what should he do here? King to e5. Should probably just go round this way and round up that pawn right away. And that would be probably good enough for a draw. So here he gives me winning chances again. Let's see. I should just run with my king. Keep on running over here. Instead I played rook to c5, putting pressure on this pawn. He goes f4. I take. He takes. And then I went rook c3 check. This is not helping my cause any because it brings his king closer to the center, which is kind of where it wants to be, but still winning. So kind of a mistaken judgment, though. I'm starting to misunderstand what's going on here. And the key point will come up pretty shortly. So he takes again, and I take back. I took with the h pawn so that I have a passed f pawn. So there's another threat I can use in the endgame, and that's why this is pretty good for me, even though I've made some little mistakes already. He goes on with d4, pushes this pawn, and now the key move here is rook to c5 here. Likes rook to c4 as well, but I think rook to c5 shows the idea better. With the rook here, I'm cutting his king off from coming back to round up this pawn, and I'm also threatening checkmate. So after rook to c5, then let's see, he needs to play d3 check because he needs to give his king some squares. Let's see, I go king d2. Now he can come over here and harass my rook. And rook to c3, drop back. And I can round up this pawn in exchange for this pawn. And this is just a better version of the game. In the game, I played this f3 move first. Seems kind of natural, but his king gets one step closer to the pawn. And these timing moves are going to be very important. Let's see. I have to drop my rook back. It's under attack, and I want to stay in touch with the pawn. And now he rounds up this pawn, and we get into this endgame. King takes c6, king here. And you see one difference already is that I'm not winning this pawn. In the previous line I showed where I played rook c5, he doesn't have this pawn, and so I have a winning king and pawn endgame. But this king and pawn endgame, after he defends here, should be a draw. He didn't play that. He played king c5. And oddly enough, this is not a draw. This is a win for white, and pretty clear example of how an engine will quickly evaluate a king and pawn endgame and tell you if you're winning. And it'll give you a really large number here. See, it's got a value of 48. If I just push the pawn to g4. What's funny is I play f4, and I think there would be a place where it becomes clear the difference between g4 and f4. So let's go forward a few moves, because I make this mistake a few times. He goes here, allowing me to play g4. I play g4. He goes a6, and now I play f5 again rather than g4. And this is where it starts to become clear how these moves differ. He can go king to e5 here, and he does. And king to e5 kind of freezes these pawns. These pawns are stuck in this awkward situation here. I can't push this one forward or he'll take it, and I can't push this one forward or he'll take it. So it's my turn to move. I can't move either of those pawns. I can't move this pawn, so my only move is with my king. Let's see, the chess engine is recommending king e2. But you'll see the difference here. See, that's not a 48, that's a 2. You might think a value of +2 is winning, but I'm not convinced. This may just be a draw. If we try and play this out, say, the chess engine is suggesting a move like king c2. Now as it starts to look ahead deeper, let's see if it can find a way. King f6. Getting in front of these pawns and staying blockaded. And then what do I play? Yeah, I see the valuation dropped. It's starting to recognize that there's nothing there. King to b3. And yeah, there's just no win, in spite of the fact that in this position, you know, it's giving moves like king c2. At first, it gives them a high evaluation. As it looks deeper, that sort of goes away. Okay, so that move I just played, that back up to that key point, that f5 move was losing because it allows his king to freeze these pawns, and the fact that I can win this pawn doesn't seem to help. The other way to play this is with g5, and so let's look at the winning variation. If I push this pawn forward, notice my king is controlling this square, the pawn is controlling this square. His king needs to come over here to try and stop these pawns. And now I can round up this pawn. That's a big difference. And let's see, he can bring his king in here. Where do I go? I guess I kind of run him out of moves. King c5 or king e3. King c5. So already it looks like I can run to the queen side. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7. So 7 moves, I get a queen. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it is, whose turn is it to move? It's my turn to move. So I will queen first in this scenario. Okay, so that's winning for me, just going for the pawn here. The other way to play it is to also drop back here and defending this pawn and kind of forcing his king back. I can get an even more favorable version of the race. But if I can win the race already, I should just start running. So that is the win here. Then I gave up. So I played f5, and he attacked the pawn with king e5. I push on with f6 because there's no other way I could see to make progress. And so he takes, I take. And I thought I was closer, but I didn't count. You've got to count. And in fact, I mean, it looks like my pawn is really close, but of course my king has to come over here, take that pawn, and get out of the way. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 moves. And then it's 1, 2, 3. So we're still 7 moves from getting a queen. And he has to round up one pawn, so you can do that in 2 moves. 1, 2. And then how many moves to get a queen? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 7 moves. But it's his move, and so he queens first. So it's that difference of 1 move is the difference between a win and a loss. Although, one more point, there's still a chance to draw here. So let's play it forward. He goes here, it's just a race. He takes, I go here, he pushes his pawn, I take, he pushes his pawn. Right here, there is a drawing chance here. You can draw with a rook pawn against a queen, and I'm close enough to do it. And the draw from this point is, the key idea is to put the king on b7, which is very counterintuitive. If you play by the usual rules, you want to stay off of this diagonal because that allows him to queen with check. But the key point is that I need to get to the b8 square here. So I play king b7. He pushes, I push, he pushes, I push. He queens with check. I drop back to b8, and this is just a draw. The problem is that he can deliver as many checks as he wants to my king, but he will never have time to advance his king closer to the game, closer to the pawn to help him win. And the reason is I will always have this move h8 queen. as long as his A8 queen, as long as his king is far away. And the way you normally stop that is by forcing the king in front of the pawn. So here, I'll show you. Queen here, check. So the king goes back, always threatening to push. So he has to play check all the time. Just step to the side. He can walk forward like this. So this is kind of the optimal way to play it. Here, this check forks my king and the pawn. I have to come over here and defend it. This check hits my king, and I move my king in front of the pawn. And this is the point. When my king is in front of the pawn, it's a stalemate, so he can't move his king. He has to move the queen again. And wherever he moves the queen, I move my king out of the way, and I'm threatening to queen again. So he can never get this king any closer. So that's just a draw. And that's how I could have drawn the game. Instead, I played king b6, staying off that diagonal, and now he queens first and wins. I go to c7, but I'm just one move too late. I'm trying to get to this square, but his queen comes in here first to stop me, and he goes on to win. Well, I resigned at this point, but it's an easy win. So anyway, I thought that was a very interesting game, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon.